You are listening to Spotlight Sessions with Justin Bamforth. The program provides an inside look at the creative field through exclusive conversations with industry professionals. Every episode is recorded live each month in the Adobe Creative Career Discord. Check out the show links to learn more and join for free, or visit adobediscord.com and click on Adobe Creative Career. This episode was previously recorded before a live listening audience. Dennis Dunbar loves working on cool images with cool creatives. But as the guy who adds the Photoshop magic to movie posters and images for ad campaigns, he is here to join us for an exclusive one-on-one about what his work as a digital artist and image retoucher is all about. In fact, since 1991, he's been working with top photographers and art directors to create compelling images for the advertising and entertainment industries, with projects ranging from posters for top Hollywood movies to national ad campaigns for major clients. His approach as a collaborator is to make it easy for his clients to realize their vision in creating the finished art. He is also an Adobe certified expert. So without further ado, Dennis Dunbar, the spotlight is now on you.
Well, gee, I feel so seen.
Well, look, let's just jump right in, because you've been in this field for a long time. But where did it first begin?
You know, it's interesting. As a kid, my brother was the one who was always naturally inclined towards art. My brother was a year and a half older than me. So he was the one who naturally could paint and draw and things like that. So I kind of leaned more towards math because that seemed to be a strong point. So I thought I'd be an engineer. In college, I was taking every class except engineering, realizing like I didn't really want to be an engineer. One of my closest friends picked up a camera and started having fun trying to take creative pictures. And it was the first person I could relate to who wasn't taking boring vacation photos. Here's me and Mabel in front of the big giant tree kind of posters, pictures and all. So that got me into playing with the camera, and then that swept me up. Like, yep, nope, not going to be an engineer. I want to learn photography. Going to go into photography. And as I was working on learning that and trying to figure out how I build a career at it, working various jobs and things related to the industry, I started to hear more and more about this coming thing where like there was a promise like you could use computers to manipulate images. Like wow, that sounds cool. And one day in like 1990, it kind of became a compelling thing. Like any day I wasn't working, I was working as a freelance photo assistant at the time. So any day I wasn't working on that, I was researching, trying to find anybody who would talk with me about this new thing. And this is before the internet, so you couldn't Google something and all that. So you're getting out the phone book and looking for photo labs and calling them up. Anybody related to that. I finally found somebody, this guy, Charles James, who was the head of a digital department at one of the local photo labs. And he said, come on down, I'll show you what things are about. So after talking with him for a few hours, realized like I had to buy some lessons from him. So I paid to buy, I think 6 hours total of lessons. It was 3 hours on a Macintosh using Photoshop and a competing program called Color Studio. And then there was another, those were the days where like the big money was in the big giant computers. So they had a Dicomed Imaginator, and it was 3 hours learning that. And like that was really like you had to be a math whiz to work on those machines. But Photoshop and Color Studio on the Macintosh kind of be really interesting. So the more I got into it, the more I realized I needed to buy a computer so I could learn. So February of 91, I signed a lease for a what they called a wicked fast Mac 2 FX. That was like $50,000 like total for all the bells and whistles and all the stuff. And I got married that June. I don't recommend starting a business and getting married the same year. It's a lot of stress. But shortly after I got married, my father-in-law took me aside and said, first thing you gotta do is get rid of that damn computer. But my wife was supportive, and so I stuck with it and somehow started learning retouching and building up clients, started working with photographers that I had assisted, and building a career from there. So that's kind of how it came about.
Wow, that's incredible. And to those of you who are just joining, I dropped a link to Dennis Dunbar's link tree. From there, you'll find his Twitter, his Instagram, his Facebook, his main website. And looking at your main website, you've done work for some big name projects, and some of which the audience might have seen and not even known that, hey, that was you. So, if you want to see some of these pieces, go to Dennis's website at dunbardigital.com and check out the entertainment section. And one of those things I see on there is one of the Harry Potter movie posters on there. How did you get involved with that?
Yeah, that was a really fun project. So through the 90s, I got into working on movie poster stuff when one of the photographers that I had worked with and doing portfolio samples with, he also would sometimes shoot for Roger Corman, who is the king of B-grade movies, like the original Little Shop of Horrors and Death Race 2000 and Attack of the 80 million foot tall woman or whatever. And Roger wanted to go from cut and paste and airbrushing to, like, I hear you can do this with computers now. So JP Morgan, the photographer, said, here's Dennis. That's what he does. So that got me into working on movie poster stuff. And the art directors I worked with through Roger went on to work at other ad agencies that did movie poster design. So I kind of followed them. And in the mid 2000s, I wound up freelancing for about a year and a half or so. I freelanced like pretty much full time at a small entertainment agency called Bemis Balkand. And then they made an offer like, we want to hire you full time. Like, okay, great. They were fun people to work with. So it was when I was working with them that I became the head finisher. And I also was wound up becoming the production manager as well for that. I don't recommend trying to be the finisher and the production manager because it's like you were the busiest person in the shop at the time for that. But anyway, they would work on the posters, and the studios would have the agencies go through round after round after round of design work, and then at the end they might pick 2 or 3 from this agency, 2 or 3 from that one, and it's like, okay, these ones want you build. Well, in that particular project, they were working on Harry Potter. Like, oh, we want these 5 done, and we want these 5 done over the course of a 3-day weekend. So wound up calling in another freelance retoucher, a friend of mine, Paho Marsh, who I've known since then and enjoy working with. But the two of us did the retouching work on those 5 of those posters over the course of a long 3-day weekend. So there were some long days, but it was a lot of fun just trying to crank this stuff out and do it. And so it was, that's kind of how the process goes. The designers work on the designs. The studios finally pick one out. It might be round 100 of variations, but then they send it to somebody like me to do the final retouching and turn that rough art into finished polished art.
Is that short turnaround time? Is that typical?
Yeah, it very definitely can be for that. It's interesting because for like ad campaigns, I would have photographers call me up or an agency call me up and say, we need these 10 product shots retouched and we have a really short turnaround. We need this in 2 weeks. Like, what? Huh? You mean I can sleep? The problem with the movie poster stuff is the studios call all the shots. And so the entertainment agencies, like, they know it's a small playing field. So like, when the client says, we want this, the attitude is always, yes, we will get it to you. And so there's a lot of, plus the studios put off making the decision about what they want. So they're always waiting for the last moment anyway. So it's kind of like, oh, these things are due to hit the presses next week. So we need this turned around in super short turnaround.
Do you ever run into a situation where you see something that kind of conflicts with what the studio is asking for, and you offer your feedback, or do you just remain silent and just say, okay, whatever?
You always have to be really diplomatic, of course, because in any work we're doing in a creative field, you have to realize it's a small world. So leading with diplomacy always is the way to go. So, you make general suggestions like, what about this or what about that? But in the end, you let the client make the call. And like when I was working at Bemis Balkan, there was a poster for a movie with Jackie Chan, The Medallion. And it was one of the rare times where somebody from the studio came into the agency and was doing an over-the-shoulder session. So I'm doing the retouching. They're sitting watching me, and they're saying, "Okay, a little more of this, a little less of that, or whatever." And one of the things was this particular poster had Jackie Chan in some martial arts pose, because that was the formula for Jackie Chan movies. And they had a one of the female actresses doing a really high kick, and her leg is really high, and her arm is out in a punch. But having studied martial arts, I looked, and her wrist was bent when she was doing the punch. So like I knew that's not how you punch. You will break your wrist when you do that, and it will be a sign to anybody who knows martial arts that this lady is just good at posing. So I said, "Can I please straighten out her wrist?" "No, leave that wrist alone. We like it the way it is." Like, "Yes, ma'am." So, there's that. Most of the time, the decisions are really more like about artistic decisions than something like that. So you kind of defer what the client wants, and when they say this is approved, send it. The last pass will be just making sure there are no mistakes, no masking lines or something that somebody missed. But other than that, you let them drive the bus because it's their bus.
Looking at some of your other work here, there's one that you have for the Will Smith film, I Am Legend. And I remember this poster. I remember seeing this in the theaters. This is really incredible. And I can't believe you worked on this one. When you mean you're doing the photo retouching, are you also doing any of the design work? Any of the typography, any of the layout when it comes to this? Or are you just focusing solely on the image?
Sometimes there's some input, but it's pretty rare that I get input on the design. When it comes to me, the design is pretty set. But like for that one, the buildings in the background, the designer had kind of stuck all these different stock shots of buildings together. And so I had to go and correct the perspective, how everything met, how that background, like seamless, the perspective lines all followed. I had to get rid of trees and cars and all kinds of stuff. This was long before generative fill, so you couldn't just here, make a selection, get rid of this tree. You'd have to figure out how to clone it or paint it or put something over it to cover it up. So there was a ton of work on that background, in addition to stripping out Will Smith and putting him, and I think there's a dog in that one too, and putting the dog in that. So it was a ton of work on that background. That's really what most of that work on that was.
Wow. So it really is truly a collaborative process.
Mm-hmm.
How do you work with some of these egos? I mean, you had mentioned, when the studios are looking over your shoulder, but are there any other egos that come into play, with maybe like an actor who doesn't look or doesn't like how they look on the poster? Have you ever gotten any feedback from them directly?
The actors, if they're a big enough actor, they almost always have a right of approval over their likeness. So they may not approve the entire design, although they will certainly weigh in on the design, but their face, their likeness. And so, I remember when I was in the early 2000s, when I was freelancing at one of the in-house at one of the big entertainment agencies at the time. I was there for a couple of days working on something else. And there was a big announcement like, "Hey, Jack Nicholson has just approved his likeness on the poster. Congratulations, Jamie." It's like, wow, that must have been quite a process. So you do have to go through that. And again, you wind up deferring. There was something I worked on in the past where it was a Christmas movie, and a lead actor and a lead actress on the poster, and the actress was going on all the late night shows saying, "I'm Miss Natural, no retouching," and she was demanding over the top retouching on every single image of her. So like okay, it's they're paying the bills, it's their art, not mine. So I just get out of the way and let them have what they want.
Yeah, when it comes to retouching, how far is too far? Like, how do you know when to stop? Because we've all seen these posters that look very retouched, but how do you balance that line between achieving perfection and still preserving some authenticity in the original?
That depends a great deal on the project. On a movie poster stuff, the retouching on faces, particularly on older actresses, tends to be heavier than a lot of my retoucher friends would go. That's really not our ideal aesthetic for this. But it's understandably like fortunately things have gotten better now. But quite a long time ago when I was a little kid, if an actress was in her mid 30s, late 40s, she was over the hill. So there's a lot of pressure on female actors to look fresh and young and all that. So I completely understand if they like, no, really soften those lines, make me look better. Like, fine. People are going to stare at your photo. It's going to be your head's going to be bigger than life size when they're standing next to the at the bus waiting for the bus and they're standing next to the poster there. So like I get it. You want your face to look like it will bear up to the closest level of scrutiny. I get that. When I'm working on something for advertising or a headshot or a portrait for a photographer, then it's a completely different kind of aesthetic. And the aesthetic I try to go for is the subject should feel complimented but see themselves. So you're not going to erase lines and things that are actually part of their face, but you might lighten them a bit. Because like I know when I look in, every now and then my daughter will take a picture of me and show me a picture like, whoa, is that really how I look? So you kind of want to marry the the uh, the still image with the person's understanding of how they look, and they go, oh, I'm looking pretty good. So that's kind of what the goal is. You want it to look real and natural, but you want the person to recognize themselves and feel complimented. There are a lot of examples I see on social media where somebody's thinking they're doing high-end retouching work, and you see plastic faces and all that. And apparently that's an aesthetic in some parts of the world, although I can't imagine any high-end client paying you a lot of money to make people look like China dolls. But you know, some people like that, and I see that on social media a lot. I admin a couple of different retouching groups on Photoshop or on Facebook, and always trying to tell them like, no, remember, people have to look like human beings. We're really hardwired to recognize what a face really looks like, and when you break something about that relationship, it sets off bells in the back of your head, and like you get the uncanny valley happening where like something's quite off. I can't quite put my finger on this, and you don't want to go into that territory as you're retouching.
Another one I see it, and I'm seeing in the chat too, a lot of people are calling this out because this is rather a very iconic image from the 90s horror film that changed everything, the Blair Witch Project. Did you really work on the poster for that?
Yes, I did. I did.
Wow.
And I know we're on an Adobe thing, uh, but actually I had to use a different program in working on part of that because getting the shadows on the face to blend up really nicely and smoothly. Um, at the time, the tools we had in the 90s, I would see the stair stepping, the banding happening with the shadows that I was trying to create them in Photoshop. And there was another program at the time that was a competitor called Live Picture. It was one of the first programs that actually had layers and things like that. It worked on a completely different kind of a proxy analogy for it. But I had to go into Live Picture and paint those shadows on her face in Live Picture because that was how I could get the really smooth blending on the cheeks and the shadows for that. But yeah, that was a lot of fun working on that project. There was also one for Blair Witch 2 that I did, but I really liked that iconic one of the face.
Yeah, that one is such an incredible image. Well, look, apart from Hollywood, you've also worked on some rather interesting projects that are not always what they appear to be, that being food.
Oh yes.
What are some of these I guess, misunderstood aspects of food photography that people may not be aware of?
Well, I think a great deal of the food photography rules now are if it's used for advertising, not just if you're a photographer making a pretty picture of food, you could use mashed potatoes to make it look like ice cream or whatever like that, and nobody's going to care. But if you're doing it for advertising, the food has to be the food. You can't fake the food for that. So it does have to be real food, and that means they have to pull up all kinds of interesting tricks. It's been quite a while since I've been on set for a food shot, but I remember before I got into the retouching and I was working as an assistant, um, we for like shooting ice cream, you'd have a thing of dry ice, and you'd be chilling that ice cream or spraying it down with the vapor from the dry ice to keep it, as cold looking as possible, so it didn't get that kind of hot, melty kind of look for it. For steaks, the food stylist might have a soldering iron that she's drawing the grill lines on with that. They would have all kinds of tricks for making that work. For the retouching work, it's just trying to make sure everything looks as perfect as possible. And again, that's client driven. So if you're working on something for McDonald's, the cheese slices on the burger have to have a specific kind of look, and you're trying to match that. And they'll send you some samples and some images or whatever that like this is what the thing's supposed to look like. It's got to match this. But they're a lot of fun to work on the food projects.
What about the automotive portion of your site here? I see a lot of vehicles. What are you trying to look for to really enhance the look of the vehicle?
It's been a while since I've worked on an automotive shot. Um, that's a really interesting kind of genre to work on. Each particular genre has its own kind of rules and aesthetic, the way people want to work with. So in the old days, when it came to when I was assisting, the photographers would spend like a couple of days building a huge set and rigging huge light banks. So they'd have a big softbox that might be 60 feet long and 10 feet wide, suspended over the car. So you get a nice continuous highlight over the top of the car. And you spend days setting up and getting the lighting just perfect. So when they took the 8x10 camera and took a couple of shots of that, everything was perfect in camera. And nowadays, with a car shot, typically what they're doing is, if it's like in a studio, the photographer will lock down the camera in a position, take the overall shot, and then start moving the lights around to like, okay, here's the front corner of this. Here's for the front tire. Here's a highlight on the front wheels, a highlight on the grill. Here's a shot for the windshield, and so on. Going all the way around the car. And so your job as the retoucher is to marry all those different things together. So you might have 10 or 20 different layers of exposures, from different frames for the car. You have to make sure they all line up perfectly, nothing jiggled around in camera, whatever. And then you're making a lot of masks and things and trying to blend all that in together and make it look seamless. If the car shot on location, there's a lot of repainting the car to get rid of unwanted reflections. So those can be a really interesting challenge for that.
As you and everyone listening knows, technology is rapidly evolving. But how do you stay current with the latest tools and techniques?
Um, a lot of different ways. I have a group of friends who are peers who've been doing the work, similar amount of time I do, similar level of what I do. One of my friends I've known since the very beginning. He worked with that guy Charles James when I was first starting out. This guy Dan Ekoff. Every couple of months or so, he'll host a meeting at his house where we've got like 8 or 10 or 12 of us get together. We'll have dinner, and then we'll just talk about a technique. One night we spent like 4 hours talking about techniques for painting hair. It's pretty amazing that you could have a bunch of retouchers geeking out and painting hair for 4 hours on a Saturday night. but that's kind of how it goes. So you listen to a lot of friends, you talk with peers and things to kind of trade off ideas. Um, I try to also uh, be current with a lot of the discussions going on. I've gotten to know Jesus Ramirez and Colin Smith, so I'll check out their videos, or if they're doing a workshop online or whatever, I'll try to catch that. And particularly Jesus Ramirez, uh, he's incredibly nice guy. I really, love hanging out with him. But almost every time he's got some little thing going on in Photoshop, like, hey, I hadn't thought of it. Like for one of the things that I picked up from him a couple of years ago, when he was doing a talk was, if you were using the rubber stamp tool to clone something on a diagonal line, and you have to have get that diagonal line to go perfectly straight and exactly, in the angle you want, it can be really annoying trying to line it up. You can have the little crosshairs in the source and in the destination, but getting it dead perfect is really difficult. And then Jesus said, there's the clone source panel, and you can have this little dialogue here where you can tap a key and move the X or the Y up or down certain pixels. Like, what? And then he said, oh, there's another key combination that you can get it to rotate. So if you want to do this on a curve, you get it, just keep having it rotate a little. Like, what? So it's trying to listen to things like that, pick up different tips from all around for that. Currently, trying to learn a lot more about using AI tools. And so there's a Udemy course on getting realism in Mid-Journey that I've kind of slowly making my way through, to see, not using Mid-Journey a lot in the retouching I do. It's more Photoshop's generative fill and the remove tool and things like that. But the more you learn about how to use these tools, the more like, oh, I think there's something coming up that'll be a solution. So you just try to always be hungry about learning. And I find that's one of the things that's great about having a long career, will help you with a long career, is always be hungry about learning something new. I have a photographer friend who's 81 years old. I met my wife through him. In the late 80s, I was freelancing for him on occasion, and that's how I met my wife. So he's been a close family friend for years. But he's gotten to the point of like, I'm tired. I don't want to learn anything new. I got a new camera. I don't want to learn a new camera. Why do they have to make a new camera? And I'm like, man, I want to be that age, and I want to be like, oh, look at this new camera I got. I'm learning all these new buttons. So I think that's the thing that keeps you alive and interested, but also vibrant in your career over a long period of time.
Yeah, it's really important to just evolve as the technology evolves, to just keep staying abreast of the latest trends, the latest styles, the latest technologies. But one in particular, and I know with some of our listeners, this is a little bit of a point of concern is, with AI, is it, should we perceive it as a threat, or should we just use it as just another tool in our creative arsenal?
I think learning it as a tool is going to be the way to go for that. We can rail against AI and whether or not AI generated imagery is a photograph. Are you an artist if all you're doing is typing in "give me a rabbit" on a green field? Like, oh look, I'm an artist. I made a great picture of a rabbit. I think that's the wrong conversation to have. There is going to be a lot of work being generated with AI that way, but it's going to tend. My hope is that's going to tend to be the lower end of the work, not the higher end paying jobs, higher paying jobs that you're going for advertising or whatever. For instance, pharmaceutical ad jobs, for photographers can be really lucrative because they're so demanding, and everything has to be really, passed by the legal team, because there's all these rules about what you can have in it. The subjects, the people in a pharmaceutical ad have to be aspirational, but they have to be real people. You can't overpromise. You can't have something like, "Look, I had cancer. I was on death's door, and 2 weeks later, I'm running a marathon." So you have to be really careful about how you're selling the product that way, that you're being realistic. So I don't imagine jobs like that are going to go to AI tools. I don't see that a legal team is going to pass that, but I think it's going to be more being used as a tool in the hands of artists to maybe create bits and pieces, maybe to be parts of their work. Maybe they are going to go through and design it all in AI, but it's going to be with an artist's eye and going through the process an artist would. One of my friends who has, this is Adobe's thing, so I'm sure everybody here is familiar with Russell Brown, and he has a great pre-conference class every year at Adobe Max. And one of my friends, Micah Burke, has, for the last 3 or 4 years, I think, done a presentation during Russell Brown's class on AI tools. And Micah uses like 6 or 7 different AI tools to create imagery. And he's very, very purpose driven. And I can't remember, half of what he goes on about doing it, just because it's, I'm not that deep into the thing yet. But like for Russell Brown's class last year, the theme was Wild Wild West. So Micah created an image of Russell Brown riding a bucking buffalo, like a cowboy. And he went through different programs. Like, here's how I generated the background. This one I used to make the buffalo. I got the cowboy on here. I had to fix the hand. I had to do this. And then I used this other one to create the hat. I used this other one to, he has a library he's made of Russell Brown's face. So he uses that to render Russell Brown's face on instead of the cowboy's face that it made. So he's going through a very purposeful set of steps using different tools appropriately, all AI generating tools, but he's using them very intentionally and very appropriately to create something new. And I think that's a good possibility. And that's sort of like, aiming towards a high end kind of result for it. But if you're just trying to pretty picture of a sunset, nobody's going to pay a photographer a whole lot of money for a pretty picture of a sunset anymore, because, with the abundance of royalty-free stock, that's about 5 cents. But, that's the kind of work that's going to go away to AI stuff. But I don't think the high-end stuff will.
This question comes from Glow, and I think this is something we all tend to wrestle with, because we have limited time in the day, and especially if we're busy, especially if you, Dennis Dunbar, you're having to contend with these tight time deadlines, these time crunches, working on projects. How do you make time for learning something new?
I think that's the benefit of having strong ADD patterns. So I find one of the things that helps me with ADD patterns is kind of allowing myself little bits of distractingness during the day. So if I'm working on something for 3 or 4 hours or whatever like that, okay, I need a little bit of a mental break, I'll watch this video for 5 minutes, and I'll make it a video about I'll check one of the lessons on Midjourney, or I'll watch a video from Colin Smith or Jesus Ramirez or something like that. So I'm carving out little sections of the day. I am trying to get more organized about things. So I've been using an app lately called Notion, which is a really cool app. The more I'm getting into it, the more I'm loving it. It's got some AI features and all that to it. But one of the things in there is I can build an interactive to-do list. So I'm putting things on a to-do list, and I'm keeping it in front of my face. And oh yes, remember today, spend 30 minutes on this tutorial, learning this tutorial thing. It's okay, instead of getting caught up in Facebook for an hour and a half, I'll shift over and okay, I'm going to watch a couple lessons in that tutorial. So I'm trying to be disciplined about carving out the time, but it's just finding little bits of time here and there.
When it comes to technology, obviously Adobe Photoshop is perhaps one of the most important tools in your creative toolbox. But what are some of the other software and even hardware that's rather overlooked in this field, or things that listeners may not be necessarily familiar with when it comes to digital retouching?
One thing that is really essential for the retouching is having a good tablet with a stylus. So Wacom makes a good line. Senselabs. We've got a Senselabs tablet that my hands are on right now, and I'm really loving that. So that's one of the tools, because trying to retouch with the mouse is like trying to paint with a brick. I have a friend who grew up as a graffiti artist in Brooklyn, and he said he grew up with a spray can in his hand. So working with a mouse is natural for him. But for everybody else, we're thinking about brush or a pencil or whatever in our fingers. So a stylus tablet like that is really essential for that. Other than that, everybody has their different little productivity uh, things. Little keyboard, little devices where you push a button and it does an action, or some sort of a shortcut or whatever like that for it. In Photoshop, I set up my own keyboard shortcuts, and now my fingers know the commands more than my brain knows the commands. It becomes a little bit of a problem when I'm doing a demo or a workshop for somebody, because like, oh yeah, duplicate layer. Where is that in the menu? My fingers just know this shape. Tap the Q key with these other keys, and like, boom, duplicate layer. But keyboard shortcuts is a great productivity tool as well.
Yeah, the muscle memory. That's what you're referring to. Yeah, we all have it, and I think we take it for granted, right? Until something goes wrong, and then we're like, wait, what was that keyboard shortcut again?
Yeah, that is important. It does remind me. I never got that terribly reliant on actions, and I think part of the reason was I didn't do that many things that were that terribly repetitive. Like, something like keyboard shortcut, a keyboard shortcut for duplicate a layer, which I do a lot, or make a new retouch layer, which I do a lot. Those things are very repetitive. But when it comes to things like I use frequency separation a fair amount in my workflow, and I have friends who are like, oh yeah, I worked with it, got to learn it. I have this action I use. I push the button, boom, it makes the layers. I don't have to think about it. And then after 6 months of working that way, you're like, oh, so what's happening when you push that button? Oh yeah, like where is that in the menu here? How do I do this again? So I like the idea of doing it manually a million times, so it becomes a part of you. Because then if you have to go somewhere, or you don't have that tool, or the action breaks sort of like that, you're not like, oh crap, I don't remember where that how to make this thing happen or whatever. So I try not to use actions as a crutch.
What's the ideal setup that you recommend for the most effective environment for digital retouching?
Well, I've always kind of favored having at least two monitors. Right now, I have a big 31-inch NEC monitor that I got from NEC, and I really love it. And then I have a 27-inch NEC monitor to the left of that, and the smaller one is set up for when I'm working in Photoshop. That's where I have all the palettes, the layers palette, and the channels, and all that stuff on there. Um, I also will drag bridge over to there, so when I'm working on something and I need to look like, oh, wait a minute, do I have any other shots that would solve this thing? I can, just look to my left and look through bridge and find it. So I like having a dual monitor set up for that, because it helps me. I've got one big monitor that's my color calibrated truth. That's the primary thing I'm working on the image at. But I've also got something else where like this space doesn't feel cluttered to me. Other than that, decent lighting. I'm not a huge believer in working in a dark gray cave. Where human beings and ergonomics and our mental state are really important. And I worked in-house at some places where like, oh, the retouching room with the very dim lights, and they've got gray painted walls and things, like, oh my God, I'm in a cave. And like after an hour, like, oh, can I get out and go for a walk? Can I get out of this room for a minute? Because my, mental state is like, ooh, I'm in the dark somewhere. So I'm not a big believer in that, but I do believe that you have to, you don't want to have like bright yellow walls behind your monitor that's going to confuse your eyes about the color for that. So you want to have it, fairly subdued in terms of the bright colors around you. You want to have lighting that's going to be indirect, that's not going to create a glare on the monitor for you. And you want to try to keep that lighting fairly consistent. because as you're going through the day, if the room's getting darker and lighter too much, it'll affect your perception of how light or dark the image you're working on is. I do like having a window in my studio, so ergonomically, every few minutes, every 15, 20 minutes or whatever, half hour, I can turn around and look out a window and let my eyes refocus on something else. So my eyes aren't focusing on something 20 inches away from me for hours at a time without relief. You go and you look somewhere else and let your eyes refocus for that. A good chair,
Ah, yes.
so my wife gave me one of these gaming chairs, and I was skeptical about it at first, but like it actually winds up being quite comfortable. Really nice. So just ergonomically, you have to make sure that it's going to be amenable for your body, because everybody's body is different. But I'm a huge believer in whatever your workplace is set up, is make sure you set it up so that for your ergonomics, for your body, that it's working well and that you're paying attention. Like, are my shoulders getting tight? Well, what's happening when my shoulders are getting tight? Oh, I'm hunching over. Oh, maybe I need to shift my position. Maybe I need to raise the monitor or lower the monitor, or maybe I need to get glasses or something for that so I can have better body posture. Trying to really focus on awareness of your body at the time is really important. I'm also a big believer in getting up every half hour, 45 minutes, and just walking around a bit. My studio at home is in a space off of our garage. It's a little prefab unit off of our garage, and it's separate, so I have to walk across the backyard to get into the house to see my wife or whatever. So like every hour or so, I'm going to get up and go say hi to her. So I'm not just sitting, and locked in a thing for that. And I think it helps me mentally take a break. It also helps my body reset and get ready. So all those little things are really, really important about how you're doing the workspace for yourself.
And to those of you who are just tuning in now and listening, Dennis is throwing a lot of information out here, but fear not, because he loves sharing this information, and he covers a lot of it too on his Substack, because you write articles on retouching and Photoshop, and you publish them there, right?
Yes, I love it.
Yeah, and I'll drop a link here. Actually, if you go to Dennis's link tree, I'll just drop it in the chat here. And if you're listening on demand, it'll be in the show notes. Check out his Substack, and there you can learn some tips and tricks. But you've also written a book, right?
Yes. Uh, Gosh, I'm trying to remember how many years ago it was now. Maybe 7 or 8 years ago. Katrine Eisman, um, who's an amazing photographer and teacher and really great person. She's now on the Lightroom team for Adobe. But Katrine reached out to me, and she wanted me to be one of the co-authors with her on a book, Photoshop Restoration and Retouching, the fourth edition. So I was really thrilled to be included in that project. I wrote 3 chapters in that. It was portrait retouching, beauty retouching, and then we jammed in product and a few other things into the last one. It's quite a while since I looked at the book, but it was a lot of fun to be part of that project with Katrine, and the other co-author was Wayne Palmer, a really good guy. Wayne had a studio in the Pennsylvania area that has focused on restoring old photos and things like that for a long time.
Hmm. Yeah, and the name of that book, if you're looking for it, it's called Photoshop Restoration and Retouching, fourth edition. So be sure you check it out. For as long as I've known you here, you're always eager to help share your expertise with others. So, for those in the audience who might be listening tonight and are thinking about entering this field, maybe they're just beginning their creative journeys, how can they best prepare for it?
Gosh, that's a great question. Um, when I started out, it was just, I felt compelled. It was the thing I couldn't not do. So I didn't think about how I prepared for it. I was just compelled to go forward. And fortunately, I had support around me and all that helped me get through the early stages as you're learning your craft and building a client base and building the trust of people who would hire you. Um, I think you need to work on building relationships. So focus on learning networking. Um, it's going to be really important in any creative career that you do. And I'm sure you see this, Justin. Networking is really, really important because that's how you connect with people who can hire you, people who you might work with in the future, uh, collaborators, peers, and all that. That's how you connect with them. It also brings a lot of joy. Just last week was at the WPPI show in Las Vegas, and that's wedding and portrait photographers. I work on some portraits for that kind of group, but not a whole lot. And usually, when I'm working on a portrait, it's for an ad campaign or something, or a corporate headshot. Um, but I went there to network. I went there to. There's a group of friends that you see at the shows, going around to the booths and things, trying to make connections with people at the booth. That was how I wound up getting connected with people at Sense Labs a year and a half ago at Adobe Max. I was on the show floor, and one of the friends said, "Oh, you've got to go over to Sense Labs and talk to Ian Sayers. He really wants to meet you." And then Ian and I became great friends, and a valuable connection. So networking is a really, really important skill for that. Uh, the trick I learned with networking is find the connectors in the group, connect with them, make friends with them, and then start bringing people into the group yourself. And now you're seen as a connector, and your profile in that group grows. And people are like, "Oh, you're a genuine person. You're not just trying to get things out of us." So once you understand that's the secret to connecting, it becomes a lot easier and more fun for that. So work on networking and building a base of connections that will help you through your career. Um, Work on learning, training your eye. If you are just coming to retouching, but you don't have any experience as a photographer or as an artist or some other kind of field like that, try to learn all you can about that, because the most critical thing with working on any sort of image-based thing is the aesthetic, the way you train your eye to see what works and what's not working for that. Photographers are really good with understanding proportion, composition, lighting. Artists are really good at understanding, illustrative artists are really great at seeing things and how everything works together and understanding the basics of, like, when I'm drawing somebody with glasses, I'm not drawing glasses, I'm drawing the lines that make the glasses. Understanding all that stuff is going to help you become a better retoucher, a better artist with what you're doing. There was somebody in the very beginning when I was working, I brought in as a freelancer, and she had written a book on some program, and she knew Photoshop inside and out technically. But when she spent 8 hours stripping one head onto one body and had a little tiny head on a big giant body, she knew the technical side, but aesthetically, she had no clue that it didn't look right. So you really got to train yourself in that aesthetic side, that you understand the art side about it, all that kind of stuff. So that's something that's really important to do. Build up a portfolio, because a portfolio is going to show what you can do and how you can connect with clients and things like, "Oh, what have you done?" Like, "Oh, okay, this is stuff. Now I have an idea of how I can use you, how I can relate to you." So it's a lot of things like that will do it. If you're starting out, make sure you've got some way of supporting yourself. So you're keeping your needs met while you're learning and while you're building. So you can start it as a side gig. You can, or if you're lucky enough and have somebody that will support you, or you've got some way of supporting, so you don't have to start off like, "Oh, I didn't have any work for 3 months and I starved for 3 months." You don't want to run into that. You have to remember that it's a marathon, not a sprint. So in the beginning, you're going to be sprinting a lot, but you also have to keep in mind it's a very long road that you want to be on. So you want to do it in a sustainable way. So make sure you can keep your body and mind together while you're learning and building.
Lots of good information. And to learn more about tonight's guest, Dennis Dunbar, you can check out his Linktree link, which I've posted in the chat, or for those of you who are listening on demand in the show notes. And there you can follow his Instagram, his Facebook, his Behance, and more, plus his website, dunbardigital.com. And if we didn't get a chance to cover your questions, feel free to reach out to Dennis directly on Discord following this show. What's the best way that people can get in touch with you, Dennis? What do you prefer?
Email is a really good way to for me to remember, keep in my mind about the connections and things. So email, I check email several times a day for that. I find Discord, direct messages through Discord are good, but I confess sometimes several days go by and like, oh, I got busy and I forgot to check the Discord direct messages. So if you send a message to me that way, just be a little patient. It may take me a few days to remember to check that out. So yeah, email or that way. If you're following me on social media, you can send me a message on Facebook or whatever like that. So I'm always open to connecting.
Beyond networking, what are some other tips on managing or even just starting a freelance business? Because you've been doing this freelance for a while, but how do you maintain that? What are some tips?
Well, if you're starting a freelance business, you've got to also remember you have to think about it in terms of like a business person. So when I was first starting out, I thought, wow, I don't have any jobs today. I've got a day off. Great. I'm going to go hang out at the beach or whatever. And I realized like I'm not doing anything to get the next job in. So I slowly learned to be fairly disciplined about every day. I try to get my butt in the office. And even if I don't have a project going on, I'm trying to look at my to-do list like, okay, what can I do to move the ball down the road? So sometimes we take a day off, but I'm not looking at like days without a project like, oh, great, I don't have to do anything because, I got to make sure next week or the week after I've got jobs coming in. I can pay the mortgage, I can pay the bills and keep everybody in the family supported like I need to for that. So you have to approach it like a business. Um, you have to always make sure you keep your marketing up. So try to be as consistent as possible about marketing. It doesn't have to be a ton of work, but find various ways of reaching out and connecting with people where the clients you want to work for who can give you the jobs that will pay to support the kind of lifestyle you want to have. You got to find out where they are and how you reach out with them. Pricing wise, you also have to understand what it takes for you to live. And that is your bottom line. You can't go below that. So that's your floor. It's not your overhead. You don't want to reach up to it. You want to not go below this level. So you think about what's my rent, what's my food, utilities, whatever you've got, add all that up. Like that's bare ass minimum I got to make every month just to stay alive. And then you have to price your fees based on understanding that. So, whatever that number is for you, you have to understand like that's my bottom line. I can't go below it. I got to make more than this. So if you think like, oh, $20 an hour sounds like a lot of money, and you realize like, well, I actually need $30 an hour just to survive, then you got to start pricing yourself higher than that. You also have to understand that since you're a business person, on average, only about half of the available hours you have to sell will be hours you're selling. The other half of the time, you're going to be working on your business, trying to keep things going and learning all those other tasks and things. So if you think I've got 40 hours in a week, I want to make, $50,000 a year. That's, $25 an hour. You realize like, oh, wait a minute. I'm actually only going to be selling 20 hours a week. So now that means instead of $25 an hour, I have to think $50 an hour. So you have to think about those things. Like, you know what? 50,000 a year isn't going to be a great life for me. I really need to make 100,000. But then you have to figure out your pricing along that way. That also helps you tune in who you're looking to get your jobs from for that. On Facebook, you see a lot of things like, I need a retoucher, and I'll do it for $5. I'll do it for $3. I'll do it for $2. Nobody's going to win with that kind of thing. And when you understand what your bottom line is, that, this is my rate and this is why it's my rate, and I'm not going to go below my rate, then you know what jobs you go after and where you look for them. So it's all those kind of things together that help you build a successful business and keep going.
Good advice. Regarding your portfolio site, this question comes from Elizabeth, but she asked, how selective are you with choosing which projects you want to showcase on your website? Do you put everything on there, or are there some projects that you keep aside, or do you put up later? I mean, how do you work through that?
My primary filter with showing work I do is I got to think it looks cool. There's an awful lot of work that we do that is paying the bills kind of work. Working on stuff for one of the streaming companies, and they might send me we need a bunch of soccer players stripped out and clipped out so we can use them in advertising. It pays the bills. Happy to do it. I don't mind doing that work, but I'm not going to here, I clipped out 10 soccer players and put that on my website, because it's not exciting work. When they put that into the ad and I worked on the ad, and oh, look, we had to do all this work for the ad, and that was a really kind of cool looking ad for a soccer show, then I'll put that on there. But I'm always trying to filter it out by what I think looks cool and is going to speak to the audience and is going to help me get the kind of work I want to get.
This question comes from Celeste. Have you gotten any of the posters you retouched signed by any of the actors or directors or people involved with the movies?
No, and it's actually been a very, very long time since I've actually gotten any of the physical posters. When in the mid 2000s, when I worked at that one ad agency, Bemis Balkand, they're now I think called InSync Plus or something like that. But when I worked there, it was a month or so later after the job was done, a box would come in here's a bunch of the copies of the poster that we worked on. So I could get one and get a copy of that. But aside from that, it was extremely rare that anybody ever said, here, we'll call up the freelancer and send him a copy of the poster he worked on. When I worked for Roger Corman, I freelanced, but when I freelanced for Roger Corman, I got a lot of those things, and some of those were really memorable. One of the things that was really cool was Roger Corman had a deal to make a poster or a movie of the Fantastic Four. It turned out to be the producing partner with him needed to produce something just to renew his rights. So the movie was produced and then shelved and never shown. They're bootleg copies, I guess you can find on the web. But I worked on the poster for that. So that poster is now a collector's item. And I have to dig up where I've got it somewhere in my garage. I'm maybe someday I'll sell it and it'll be worth some money. But it's pretty rare I actually get copies of the posters I work on.
Well, I'd love to keep on chatting with you, but that about wraps it. I mean, we've been talking for an hour, so that ends this episode of Adobe Spotlight Session. So I want to thank my guest again, Dennis Dunbar, for joining us tonight and discussing his incredible career journey. Be sure to connect with him on his Linktree or over at dunbardigital.com. If you enjoyed this program, catch all the latest updates for the next Spotlight Sessions and all the great content here in the Adobe Creative Career Discord by following the upcoming events at the top of the server so you can see what's coming next. Thank you to everyone who tuned in to listen to me, your host, Justin Bamforth, aka JBam. You can always find me on Discord, LinkedIn, or my website, justinbamforth.com. But that's about it. We are out of time. So until next time, everyone, take care.
Thanks a lot, Justin. Good night.
For more conversations with creative professionals, subscribe to the Spotlight Sessions podcast or check out the Adobe Creative Career Discord. Links are posted in the show notes, or visit adobediscord.com and click on Adobe Creative Career.